You're looking good. Yep.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are. I'm Sneha Jadhav, and welcome to Weekly Wednesday by Driverless World School. I'm very happy New Year to you all. I'm glad you guys were able to join in. Sorry about a small lag that we had, just logistical issues, but thanks for your patience. So, without further ado, I would like to actually start with our guest today, Anna Chubinidze, and she's going to be talking to us about AI ethics. She has a very extensive background in AI governance, AI ethics, AI assessment, and I thought that in continuation with our last year's topics, this is a great way to come into this new year and talk about it. So I would like to actually, so the format today is Anna has some slides that she would talk about, and Susanna, who is our in-house AI ethics expert, would actually be interviewing her. Anna, I would like to pass it on to you for a quick introduction, and then you can jump in and with your slides.
Okay, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me on this weekly bed. I'm very excited to share my expertise, whatever I have in AI ethics field, and very happy to be here. Okay, then I'll just quickly jump to my introduction to myself. That is, my background is academic background is in international relations, political sciences, with a focus in international relations, international law, and economics. And my AI story and my AI adventure kind of started during my master's studies 3 years ago, where I participated in a project for collaborating with the United Nations, where for 9 months I worked on an AI policy paper about the foresight regulations for artificial intelligence. And to be honest, at that time, like almost 3 years ago, actually, it was quite new topic. And if you mention that to anyone with engineer, AI developer, or ML engineer, then they would kind of have confused face. What kind of regulation do I talk about? So yeah, after that, I got so much interested in that. Then I started to look for the ways how I can deepen my knowledge or understanding, and I decided to actually take my career path towards that direction. So I started data science courses, learned some Python, uh, like machine learning development, some data crunching, and so on, to actually, I mean, not to transfer from my political science career to ML developer, but to better understand the technology in terms of looking at it from AI ethics or regulatory perspective. And then I worked, also my master's thesis I wrote in terms of AI, that was the effects of content personalization on personal autonomy. And that was a very interesting topic and stays until now my top interest. However, I have a very broad interest in terms of AI ethics and how it can influence the overall future of humanity. Um, so afterwards, I worked for big four companies for some time. I worked for, contributed with different organizations, for example, such as IEEE. I'm a member of many global AI communities. And so basically right now I'm the citizen of Georgia. I'm from Georgia country. That's the small country in between Europe and Asia. So right now I'm there, but I was in Germany and I'm planning to get back there very soon. So the last thing that I did was starting my own nonprofit organization this summer, and that is registered exactly here in Georgia. So with the kind of vision and understanding that is, as a location like Georgia is the building bridge physically, geographically between two continents, that is Asia and Europe. And then I wanted to somehow give that kind of vision, one of the major visions to the organization, to connect these two parts of the world together, to bring together different stakeholders and different cultures or understanding of ethics and other philosophy or other topics, questions, and to raise the questions and awareness for the global community and global audience for these topics. Um, so the organization I launched with in November with two event series. One was about responsible AI for data science, putting together. Um, also have actually on that slide probably that's better to already open up that and share my screen to kind of
Yeah,
visualize what the organization is about.
sure. So you
And
can
then
start your demo for the slides. And then as in when questions, so I would encourage the audience to type in the questions. And I know Susanna is going to pitch in and ask questions on the slides as we move along.
mhm.
This shows better lighting on your face. Maybe it's from your laptop.
Yeah, it's just not a good camera, and I have no technical.
And I thought you had gone and learned Python.
Yeah, I did.
Python and machine learning, if I heard her right. That's really awesome.
Wow.
Yeah, that was quite challenging for me as a with background with political science, and I also like at that point had to learn some math and some stuff like that I never learned neither in high school or university, like some calculus. Um, so basically, that was quite challenging, but yeah, that was most interesting part about it.
Yes.
Uh, and I really believe that without like overall understanding of the all topics and multidisciplinary approach, then it's kind of impossible to look at things um, from a right direction, hopefully.
Yes, very true.
So yeah, yeah, that was introduction about myself, like connecting political science with emerging technology. Specifically, right now it's artificial intelligence. Then it will come like quantum computing and neuromorphic computing. That's also the future, and merging with artificial intelligence. And here is exactly my nonprofit initiative, AI Governance International. And I've listed 5 major steps and aims that I want to fulfill with the organization, and that is transparency, pragmatic approach, responsible approaches, and frameworks. It has to be AI frameworks, truly inclusive, and it has to be multidisciplinary. So in truly inclusive, once again, I mean all communities from around the world. Truly inclusive is all genders, all kinds of people from everywhere, because the technology is going to actually change the world forever. That's what I believe. Mm. But I want to actually emphasize on more truly inclusive and comparing the East and Western side of the world. Right now, I will divide like from as East and West, but actually in West, we mostly, especially in terms of technological development, the northern part, like United States and European Union countries.
Hmm.
And ongoing projects, as I mentioned, right now, these 2 event series that were the aim to connect AI ethics practitioners with data scientists. Those are still kind of separate people. Data scientists do not understand what we really talk about, and like in most of the cases, and AI ethics practitioners probably have less a technical understanding and less case scenarios in their mind to actually think about. So this event was about putting these people together, presenting their best practice examples and their practical experiences, what they're implementing in their organization or in their company, and to explain that to the actually there was like more than 500 registrants and more than 200 people actually joined the event. That was quite surprising. So there is interest to actually and questioning how to implement practical approaches after we already gained so much theoretical frameworks in terms of AI ethics. The second project was that promoting AI, artificial intelligence technology potentials for sustainable development goals, those of United Nations. Those are 17 goals, and this field is also very, very under researched, and there is very little examination done. So I also wanted to kind of raise awareness about the topic and let the people know that there is so many problems out there in the world they could solve with the machine learning and their AI approaches. Um, One of the inspirations even was that someone contacted me via LinkedIn asking me like they're a group of AI and machine learning developers and they want to kind of find the problem which they would solve and like one of the answers, possible answers would be like just look at the 17 UN SDG goals and like choose there a lot of problems that you can actually address with your AI solution. So I've invited the people who actually worked on solving those problems with their companies, their project, like to storytell and share their experience. And the second panel was just a discussion about future possibilities. And third is this is work in progress, not yet with result. This is the kind of niche of my organizations that I'm planning to take to focus the work on industry-specific domains because AI ethics is different in healthcare, it's different in autonomous driving, it's different in financial industries and so on. So currently we have identified like 9 industries where we want to continue work. Yeah.
So,
And why I
if
said I will
I
focus.
can
Oh,
interrupt
yeah.
you for a second, Anna. Like you just said that you met with, you had an event with 500 participants and you're trying to connect AI ethics practitioners with data scientists. So, what was your main takeaway from that? Because I see a lot of pain points between explaining from a non technical background to a technical background related discipline, my concerns, sharing my concerns with them. So, what was your main takeaway from that event and what did you learn from it?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Yeah, that's a very interesting question because so basically one of the requests that I have towards speakers was that to discuss not like what to do but how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they discuss it. They share their best practice examples. There was overwhelming chatting actually in the Zoom chat. It was in Zoom from all the participants, and the feedback that I received was very. I mean, it was the experiences that the speakers shared was very interesting for the speakers. But one of the missing points from that was that they were still missing, like we moved from what to how, but now we want to move from how to do things, but how we are already doing that. Not like talking in future terms,
Mm-hmm.
how possibly it would be better and speculate on some ideas, um, but to actually share what is already being implemented in practice and what are the results, and to share what kind of gaps are there, how to address those. And so basically the interest like is growing like already exponentially in terms of AI ethics. For 3 years we have worked on frameworks, theoretical frameworks, and now interest grew to from theory to practice, how to implement it, but already from practice, already there is interest in ongoing processes, like to explain processes and implementation, how to do it in day-to-day practice.
Hmm. Interesting.
So yeah, basically that was the kind of feedback of the event that I had and I received from the audience as well.
Awesome. Please continue.
Okay,
So,
I hope that answers. I hope that answers your question. So yeah, and as I said, I will mostly in these 5 things that I listed from the organization's goals, I will just focus on the one of them, that is the truly inclusive approach, which is global approach. So why global outreach is important. To tell briefly, so there is like these 2 sides, us and them. What I mean in that is that usually we are running these technologies, AI technologies, from Western side perspective, from Western philosophy, Western political systems, economic culture, and so on. Like it's like looking at it from European perspective mostly, and from United States perspective, because those are the continents that are developing the technologies mostly, not this time considering China. So usually the approach is like, we are doing this because our political systems are the right way, our economy or the way our economy is run is the right way, our philosophical approach is the right way, our lifestyle and the culture is the right approach. And we think that other, like Eastern and other people's approaches might not be or are not correct or are not the right way. So we don't really incorporate their approaches and their philosophy in our AI ethics framework. That is very, very risky right now because the AI technologies are really, like, we don't still realize how that happens and how it's going to happen, but they are really changing our future and our all aspects of our life. So because it's about everything, it's about our mind, our economy, and our consciousness, one of the major questions. And one of the major things that I want to underline here, it's very, very big topic. I will not try to cover it in this presentation, but one thing that I want to underline here is that a major difference that we are finding between Western culture and Eastern cultures is that Western culture puts more emphasis on thought and mind, like on rational thinking of the people, and they don't put their emphasis in their day-to-day life, for example, on spirituality, while consciousness and understanding consciousness is more about, and probably not like more about understanding a spiritual side of the human mind. So even if you think the brain is mathematically programmable, even if you think that you can write any code for any decision the human brain makes, there is still this other side that we do not understand. What makes consciousness consciousness, and how do we think? How do we interact probably with the whole universe? So there is Buddhism, for example, like in recent months, I see one article circling around the social media. What Buddhism can, for example, contribute in AI ethics. So this is totally different, kind of totally different worldview. I'm again not going deep into the explaining that what's the difference between. If the audience then will have the question, then I will answer that. But there is a very big difference between these approaches. The Buddhist Eastern approach towards human mind, consciousness, and spirituality, and between European side. Just recently, people started to talk about mindfulness, for example, meditation, and these things, but it has not been in place so far for a very long
Can
time.
you give one example of how AI in facial recognition or in autonomous vehicles or any facet of AI development, and how it is different from the Western philosophy and the Eastern philosophy? Like, give a particular example, especially in facial recognition. What comes to your mind?
In philosophy side, um, like if you okay, I'll put that again in Buddhist perspective. For example, in autonomous driving, in facial recognition. I mean, these are two different things. In,
Yes.
if you look at, for example, in autonomous driving and autonomous decision making, you want to think that. So Buddhist perspective, for example, puts that in a sense that um, they look at the things that everything is connected, and every decision you make is kind of connected to the whole universe, to the whole world, and affects everyone, and your
Mhm.
decisions also affected by uh, everyone in the whole universe.
Mhm.
And also your self and your identity is kind of not separated from everyone, like it's not um, it does not stay here forever, or is not separated from everything else. So from that perspective, all that is happening spiritually, everything is connected to everything else. While in Western side philosophy, we know that Western philosophy and United States culture is very individualistic, for example. And in this case, the high emphasis, for example, on autonomous driving or autonomous decision making would be that the um, the algorithm can um, make decision completely outside of any other stakeholder, any other connection to other outside world, and not connected, like not
The way
connected
I
to
see it,
anything else.
I think Eastern
That
philosophy
was,
is multi-stakeholder, and Western philosophy is mostly focused on whoever is the beneficial party at the moment, whoever is benefiting from the product itself. So they are like very single, or maybe by stakeholders, but not multi-stakeholder related. So do you agree with that, like philosophical statement that Eastern philosophy is more multi-stakeholder? In that, even in facial recognition, I see there is actually they think about the context beyond the scenario itself, which when detecting your facial expressions, they think beyond that in Eastern philosophy. But in Western philosophy, it's more like right now you are smiling, so the environment that you are in currently is what making you smile, but I could be smiling for a lot of different reasons too. So I think that's my takeaway from that, that there is this difference. So
yeah, exactly. Yes, I said, like Western culture, United States culture puts high emphasis on individual self and individualistic approach, while Eastern philosophy more emphasis on community decision making, understanding other, like more it's more empathetic, understanding also other stakeholders and your environment's um, opinions or state of the mind, or um, their needs. So that's kind of major difference. That is difference, and that is really what is needed right now in AI ethics. Kind of understanding various contexts, various communities' needs, and cultures, and their mindset to actually consider during decision making.
So, from my understanding, right, there's this distinction between Western philosophy, which is more individualistic, and it's more about the rational mind, whereby if you look at non-Western philosophy, or even, let's say, Japanese, if you look at the Japanese government, their priority area is more about, the integration of AI in society. So they're looking at maybe how can we use AI to increase the birth rate of women in Japan, or how can we increase productivity to match the needs of the consumers. So I was looking into this as well, and it's kind of this different approach, like you said, to help tailor production to meet the needs for the most people in the society. So
Yeah,
is that something that you were looking at as well, or?
yeah, exactly. I think I didn't look at Japanese government specific policies right now about whether they're going to implement it in birth rate increase. But I do agree. Exactly, Japan is also included in those countries that are in that terms, also looking at how other people are interacting with each other on a day-to-day basis, and they're considering the community and other people's opinions as well. It's not. It's kind of talking probably to extremes, like Western to individualistic, Eastern probably too much community based. So that's why it is meaningful to look at both sides and not only take one side and narrow approach and look. Either look at think that only Western approach is correct and correct way, including all the political systems or culture, um, or either Eastern approach is best. So I wanted to just highlight with one example this why there is possibility that Western side is doing something wrong in their political life and social life, or probably lifestyle, and why it would be probably beneficial to incorporate the Eastern cultures as well. And I think these statistics, I mean, there is, I don't find the research about correlation or something. It's just my thought and my interpretation. Just wanted to share with you. So it's this the suicide rate across the world.
Hmm.
If you look at the crude rates per 100,000 population, you will see that, for example, Americas has quite high rate, 9.8, and Europe has the highest rate if you look at this, 15.4. And there is the very low rate Eastern Mediterranean. There is Africa, low rate Western Pacific, and Southeast Asia. So from this, I wanted to highlight the idea that probably, like, looking at these statistics, it's good to think about, and once again highlight what I already said, that Western side puts high emphasis on kind of rational approach, rational thinking, and on mind, on thinking, while Eastern side puts more approach on spirituality, how to improve day-to-day life, daily practices, how to actually contribute to community, how to help others, probably empathy, and so on. While this is very different in Western culture, and probably this statistics is kind of revealing of that difference, and probably that makes sense to think also in that way. Why, for example, implementing Eastern understanding and spirituality approaches in a day-to-day life and in our social and cultural and political lives in Western side could be beneficial. Not, and of course, I'm talking in terms of AI ethics because this is the technology side that is influencing all the aspects of our life. Once again, I'm saying I'm repeating that many times, but I just want to emphasize on that. If you have any thought about it, that would be great to hear. That just my interpretation of the fact or thought. So just to summarize, it's not only about Eastern and Western. Of course, there is other world, Southern world, and other northern side. Of course, there is a lot of countries, and one of and basically the regulatory framework and state culture and state policy and politics that we are seeing currently. There is very, like, not even half of the countries have their state strategy. So there is a lot of countries that are out of that. Not only ethics, but again, in terms of regulations. Like also Georgia, the country which I mentioned, and I am there, is lacking that kind of approaches, any kind of strategy. So one of the major goal of the organization, of the nonprofit organizations that I started, is that to engage such countries, whether it's from Africa, from Southern America, or from Middle East countries, to actually raise awareness in those countries and to encourage and facilitate to have some regulatory approaches or some strategy, some standard, or something that could be beneficial for the population itself and not generate harm. Yeah.
I,
If
I
you have, if you have question with this, then I'm going to the risk side.
There are no questions, just like one comment, because I worked in affective computing and we're trying to assess human emotions and trying to quantify that as into AI. So the in that what we noticed is it's very difficult to judge the emotional content of men versus women, and that is across the board, whether you come from a Eastern or Western country. But it's actually very telling that we use context as a proxy to find out the true emotional assessment of a man. But in that way, this you have to be really understand what the uh, societal and cultural context of an Asian home is versus a Western home, because those two are very different. So even building something like that, you go into a big rabbit hole, and this is like a ocean. If you're trying to quantify context in an Asian
Yeah,
culture
exactly.
and Western
Yeah,
culture.
exactly. That's why I said, I mean, I haven't seen any research about correlation. This is just a speculation or thought about the statistics. That could be probably one of the cases or one of the contributing factors in terms of these differences.
Yes.
So I will move with another big question that I wanted to focus on today. That is how much time we have.
I think
Yeah,
good.
right.
So we have about 40 minutes. Um,
Okay.
Sorry, 20 minutes, my bad. So we have about 20 minutes. So yeah. Do you want to move on to assessment and then take questions at the end?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So the next big question that I wanted to emphasize on today is risk and impact assessment, algorithmic AI ethics, risk and impact assessment. So I want to differentiate between these two sides. There is technical risk assessment. Of course, I'm not talking about that today. I'm considering ethical risk and impact. So I will start again like two directions. I want to differentiate again between two directions.
Mm-hmm.
The risk, the impact assessment of the algorithm that is planned to, that has a specific purpose, and it actually accomplishes the purpose pretty well, but it has some unintended consequences, like harmful consequences. And there is another side probably, that is the algorithm that already includes some risk during development and already includes some risk after it is deployed. So there's already this. I want to differentiate between two sides. So the solution that works very well, but it causes some unintended consequence, and the second one, that there is some already risk scenarios possibly, and you just have to mitigate that. And I will mostly focus on unintended consequences and impacts, and that could be on environmental risks, that could be societal, human rights, political, economic, and any other area of life that you could think of. Um, right now, risk assessment and impact assessment is very, very less in dialogue across the globe. There is very few initiatives, and you would guess those are the countries that are actually leading the AI policy frameworks right now, and those are Western countries. But actually, to be honest, that is my perspective, that Canada is kind of leading the dialogue in these terms. So recently, United States published a bill that was Algorithmic Accountability Act 2019, and also Automated Decision Systems Accountability Act of 2020. And those were the acts that you could find, those are so far not binding, but those are the acts that you can find probably useful for some guidance for the companies and organizations. But there is very like there's a lot of drawbacks in those documents. One of the drawbacks, for example, would be these documents differentiate between high-risk scenarios and algorithm and low-risk algorithm. While they only focus on the high risk, for example, high-risk algorithm, that they define it very broadly. For example, those are the algorithms that contain um, that work on data, including personal data such as gender, your health data, your local data, and so on. So basically, the understanding of high-risk algorithm is very broad, and it's very hard for the companies to actually differentiate that. Another thing is that this only puts the responsibility on the companies that have very high amount of users, starting from 60,000, if I'm not mistaken, and have some specific revenue, 5 billions. So that is another drawback, because there are some companies that are actually implementing these solutions that has high influence on the on wider society. And another country that is implementing and actually leading these impact assessment frameworks and understanding is Canada. They have quite a broad overview, and they have quite broad guidelines actually and tools already provided on their website. I'm not including right now there, and doing the overview would take a lot of time, but I invite you to actually check the website. It's called Algorithmic Impact Assessment, shortly AIA. And there is, unlike the United States bill, there is a lot of tools provided for the organizations to actually assess their assess the solutions, impact of their solutions. There is specific metrics provided. There is a specific solutions and differentiations, for example, between high risk, between middle risk and low risk. So Canada is doing a broad work on that. They have also the questionnaire that you have to fill. It takes like half an hour for the company to fill this questionnaire, and then they give you some points to actually assess your state of being of your algorithmic solutions. But of course, they're also stating that themselves it's not in its perfect state. Of course, it needs much more development. It's in its very infancy, and they require the comments from the outside stakeholders to provide. And the last geographic area to consider is, of course, European Union. But in this case, European Union has nothing like regulation specifically for impact assessment, but there's some scholarship sites already that are trying to represent GDPR's approach and data protection frameworks in terms of artificial intelligence impact assessment, ethical risk assessment. So that is the approach basically that is trying to actually highlight the focus on GDPR's articles that allows the companies to voluntarily assess the impact of their solutions. It's not so far binding, it's not obligatory, it's not like it would be a compliance issue for the company if they don't do the impact assessment specifically or separately, but there could be found the interpretation where the company can find the tools in GDPR to use for impact assessment.
So I think this actually became the European Union GDPR actually became quite relevant in the last week when WhatsApp and Facebook, the whole issue between WhatsApp sharing data with Facebook and that you have no opt out in the United States, but you that issue is not even relevant in the European Union because the GDPR takes care of that. And Facebook did not do that in Europe, but only they gave this option, this non opt out option to everybody in the United States. So I think regulations do work, even though we don't actually see the impact of it. It was very real. As AI ethicists, we were all very impressed with how Facebook couldn't do anything in European Union, but they could try all these gimmicks with us, with our privacy, and play games with us in the United States. So, what do you think about that? What do you think about the power of such policies in impacting AI ethics?
Yeah, exactly. I agree. That was really a good practice example from GDPR, not allowing Facebook to use their users, WhatsApp users' data. Um, I think there is a lot of areas where GDPR work, and that's why it's quite, or the European Union has or kind of this reputation that they're putting quite strict regulations in place for companies, and I think it was quite expected probably from the wider audience that Facebook, WhatsApp would not be allowed or would not be able to reach that kind of evil goal. Uh, so exactly like from European ethicists, from AI ethicist perspective, GDPR really works in most cases. I mean, in cases for data protection, for whatever it was actually aiming from the beginning. GDPR, I mean, I want to emphasize on the fact that GDPR is not a regulation for artificial intelligence specifically. It's a regulation for data protection.
Yes.
And as long as it can also kind of include the areas of other um, realms of artificial intelligence that could come under data protection, then it's totally fine. It's totally welcome. But European Union is very much missing other regulations that is concerning not only data protection, but for example, decision making, autonomous decision making. GDPR uh, is not very specific in terms of autonomous decision making, for example. And
Mm.
there is a lot of gray areas and a lot of gaps if you take the whole AI regulation framework. So yeah, I totally agree. In terms of data protection, it works. But if you look at other AI areas, then EU needs a lot of work. But so needs many other countries.
Mm. Interesting.
Um, and for the impact assessment, first I will mention why it matters, and then I will bring some examples that I have in mind. Um, the most benefit that what impact assessment and algorithmic impact and risk assessment could bring is that um, it facilitates actually informed decision making and protection of societal problems and questions. Then it also facilitates the compliance with different regulatory requirements and also standards. Standards probably not binding, but it is good to have for some companies for reputation and so on. Also, generally, it also facilitates and and improves the reputation of the company. For public sector, it's good to have such impact assessment in place, and also corporate and social responsibility. And then it provides kind of evidence for due diligence that the company or organization has done some homework in terms of understanding their algorithm and what kind of impact they can produce for the wider society. And the examples that I like to bring usually is that what is usually quite easy, the first example easy to understand for most of broader audience is the example of Facebook that I also used in my paper. That is um, because for me that also kind of changed my understanding of the companies and of the people who are actually working in those companies. Um, because this is the case. So the very people who actually worked on inventing the Facebook like button, like this button, it was launched in 2009. After 10 years, we see the interviews of them and the articles that those people are trying to um, add some extension in their Google Chrome browser or in their phone to actually block the usage of their Facebook application, because that very like button is feeding the notification field of the Facebook. It's kind of is obsessive, addictive, and it's it's becoming not possible to control yourself, even for the very creators of the um, application. But what was their very initiative intention is that they wanted to, with that like button, so Facebook is actually the inventor of the like button, we all know, right? It was not there before. So they wanted to, they had a very, very good intention actually. They wanted to, instead of writing the long comments when someone likes your post or your photo, for example, you just give this thumbs up. So it's easier and you can kind of lift up your friend and your connection by showing your support with this easy button, right? So that was the intention. Another was also, of course, for ads, but um, I mean, in time, it kind of changed in a very different way. This kind of like button became something that was only numerical. The more likes you have, the better social acceptance you have. It kind of started to play with your confidence, with your personal presence, with presence in the virtual space. And people kind of started to fake it and misuse it, the like button. So it was again like misconduct, misuse of the technology of the best with the best intention in the end, in the beginning, sorry. Um, and even its creators were then struggling with that. So this is one of the examples. Then I like to think, would it be possible to actually start thinking and considering about these unintended consequences of the like button before they would put it in place? Or would it be possible, like instead of waiting for 10 years, actually they started to talk about it after 10 years, after there was quite damage done already to the whole society. Would it be possible then, instead of like talking about it after 10 years, to actually look at it and experiment it after 2 years, then after another year, or every year, or what kind of assessment they could, or metrics they could put in place where they could control the influence on the society, the bad influence. And actually in 2019, they launched the experimental Facebook in Australia, which actually was working without like button. I mean, with like button, but it was invisible to others. Only the user would be able to see the number of their likes.
Hmm.
Um,
I have
so
a
yeah,
question about that. So, as a startup developer, I think we consider ethics as we're developing out products, especially with AI. But the reality of the marketplace is it's like you throw pasta on the wall and wait for it to stick. And is it reasonable to ask these companies that are trying to run forward at lightning speed to have the first off to have the ability to even think through all those possibilities? If some of these, for instance, like Instagram, were when they were envisioned, they were a two-person startup. So is that reasonable, or is there a better approach, which is broad awareness of capabilities of AI so that the public, before they sign up for a service, is already thinking about consequences to privacy, for instance?
so for the public or for the company?
Well, I guess that's the ethical question. Whose responsibility is it?
Yeah, yeah,
Is
I
it
don't
me
know.
as a consumer? Is it my responsibility to be informed and aware?
Mhm.
Or is it up to the company to not do the right thing? And I'm not taking a position. I'm just curious on the point of view.
Okay, so my quite strict and set position on that is that both sides should have the responsibility. And on my um, organization's website, on my nonprofit organization's website, I actually have it under the mission that we should promote not only responsible company but also responsible user. That is one thing. Another thing is that there is definitely incentive for the companies to actually take care of these things, because you already see like in which state, in which kind of reputation there is already Facebook. Um, like starting from this kind of clashes continued, for example, Cambridge Analytica clash is another example that I could bring, is that we see that because they didn't take care of this, they now are having a lot of reputational issues. And Facebook is turning from the social media that was very popular across the globe, with every society. Right now, it's kind of, people already don't look at it serious. Most of the people around globe, I guess, that's my belief, including myself, Facebook kind of lost that audience and that users that they had before, and they're losing now. Mostly Facebook users are probably um, people of grandmothers or grandfather's age, and the younger people are transitioning to other social media because Facebook kind of lost the value where it started. This is one thing. Another thing is that take WhatsApp, for example, this WhatsApp clash, the last clash. Um, you know Signal, right? Even myself, I downloaded the application after the clash. After WhatsApp clash, the download of Signal increased by several million. Like it's definitely something to take into consideration. Of course, when you do something that spoils your reputation, then you're gonna get something in return. So it is reflected. It's definitely worse. If Facebook does not care about my data, then I, as a user, I'm gonna delete WhatsApp and download other application that is actually taking care of my data. If there is anything like that, if there is not, then yeah, I might stay as a user of WhatsApp. So yeah, there is high reputational incentive for companies, at least, if not
so
compliance.
to kind of just expand just a second, in the last 5 days since the insurrection, the social media has been data mined extensively for photographs of people that were there on site. And, it's a side effect, right? It's a side effect that you have social media platforms that allow anybody to upload a photo. And I don't think anybody thought the original idea was to enable law enforcement to use that and to enable private citizens to data mine, and like this hacker that went through and hopped onto Parler and essentially data mine the entire 90% of their database. That opens up, I think, even bigger ethical concerns. I'm just curious what your take is on that, because the consequences of that is people are going to be put in jail, rightfully so, for those that committed those acts. And it's enabled law enforcement to go the next deeper level in surveillance. And I don't think we're going back. I think we're going to be closer to the UK with this sort of thing happening, because at the end of the day, it's actually enhancing the greater good. Uh,
So yeah, if I get the question correctly, so I believe in this case there is one thing about cybersecurity.
Sorry, Anna. Can you just stop your screen sharing so we can see you when you speak?
Oh.
It's good, very good discussion.
Okay.
You can continue back the sharing. Thank you. Later, yeah.
Why I don't?
Usually you just
Yeah, I think you
mouse down.
stop sharing. It should go away.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So in this case, there is one thing. So I think we're going back to the concept of responsible user, one thing, and another thing is kind of technical risk, that is a risk for cybersecurity. If I get the question correctly, the one thing is that if there is, in terms of AI development, there is robustness is one big topic. In robustness, we mean not only, for example, the bias or working against bias or data protection, but there is also the big issue with the technical robustness, working on the algorithm, so it is not approachable by the hackers and so on. So in these terms, the questions of liability and accountability kind of is changing and is also blurry in terms of current regulations. And there is kind of, then there goes the responsibility to the user. If the user is really, if the user possesses the data that is really concerned about that, then they should not be comfortable about sharing the data. For example, like I and you are seeing a lot of people on the social media sharing their day-to-day photos from wherever they go, wherever, like checking in, wherever they are located, from sharing like kind of all their opinions or comments publicly on the social media. Probably that's where the line is between the responsibility of the company and responsibility of the user. As a user, then you should feel responsible for your own data and careful for what you really want, do not really want to share, then you do not share.
So the
Also, kind of check out the privacy policy of the application that you're using most on a daily day-to-day basis.
It
I
puts
think that's very unrealistic. You know, I have so many friends that have shared pictures of deeds, trusts, licenses, like really sensitive personal data. And I would hit them up in a private message. Do you know everybody's seeing your data? And he's like, no, only my friends are seeing it. I don't care. And it's this ignorance that is propagated by every company's release of their own liability with that stupid privacy statement.
Mhm.
No one reads it. And judges are now coming back and saying, you can't expect a button. You can't, there's been two recent cases that talked about folks either opting in to a privacy and terms statement without actually clicking a button. And those are being thrown out, right? But it's not realistic for anybody because it's a gate, right? If you say no, you can't use the app. There's no ability, even with cookie statements that are coming up, which is totally annoying now. It was like now you can opt out to sections of the cookie, but I have absolutely zero belief that that's actually doing anything to reduce the amount of spam and other stuff that I'm getting. So I think that to me, I think the challenge is it's great to say everybody is needs to be ethical as a company and responsible as a user, but there's an education piece that's totally missing to this. And it's like it's understanding the vastness of this. And we spent 4 years in this country with lies and deceit from the person who should have been above all of that, who should have been ethically concerned about the quality of America. And it's really surprising. So I'm just like, frameworks sound really awesome and it makes a lot of sense, but how do we get it to the next level?
I agree with Dan, putting a lot of burden on the user to understand everything, to make sure you sign up for everything, you read every document. I just, I am on WhatsApp, and that's where most of my family is. Long back in 2016, I had the option to opt out of sharing data with Facebook, and I took that option. And so that's why I'm now in the clear according to Facebook, but I still don't believe them. But I'm sharing, like, my dad was in the ER recently, and I was sharing details, personal details about what happened with all my friends and family. It's I believed it was end-to-end encryption, but now if it is not, if it was being shared with Facebook and was connected to everything that I was doing, how even as an informed user, I'm already now being duped. So you can't put any more burden on the user, but it is about time we started putting burden on the companies. But I also agree with Dan's statement. It's because I worked in the corporate industry as well. It's very fast paced. It's like throw it up on the wall and see what sticks and what works. And it's like go 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 go. You can't really start to think about what will happen down the road. When you use the example of the Facebook like button, there was one way that they could have actually predicted that if they had a psychologist in the room. We would have immediately told them a like button is social acceptance. It's going to psychologically manipulate you whenever you see your friend appreciating something. It's such a reward. It actually affects the dopamine part of your brain. So we would have immediately said this is going to have a huge impact. let's at least, we would not have predicted it that it would have the impact that it has now, but we would have at least raised the issue in the room. So a multidisciplinary approach in the framework is very essential, according, that's my that's my stand. But I still, this is a hard problem, it's not that easy to solve. But I think we cannot put the burden either only solely on the companies or solely on the user. We have to share the burden as well. But it is time we actually held the companies up to a higher standard and started
That's
questioning
yeah,
everything.
I totally agree actually with you, Susan, about actually putting more responsibility to the company. Of course, um, there is the very there is very kind of strict line between the responsibility of the user and the company. But what I mean is that there is still, it's not only putting and giving all responsibility to the company and leaving the user only for themselves and with zero accountability or responsibility.
No.
So there is still something, but of course, companies are most responsible for their deeds. And as for Dan's comment, yeah, that's where actually kind of vicious circle starts in, like what we really do about the companies that are um, generating so much data, working on that, getting some overview of us, of the people, profiling, so on, using that. That's why the companies itself are kind of waiting for the governments and states to put some kind of regulation in place. If you ask them and their marketers or their CEOs, they're gonna send, I mean, they're not going to do it voluntarily, probably, unless it's they're highly concerned about reputation, or they just will hope that they will get away with that. Um, what they're asking is that regulations in place and standards, relevant standards.
Hmm.
And as long as and unless there is no regulations, neither in United States or European Union, then they will kind of keep doing that, and there will be kind of no rescue for the users and for the users' data. Now the responsibility I'm putting on not only on companies, but it goes to the states and to the regulators. And again, as I already said, GDPR is only for data protection, and there's a lot of gray areas even in European Union. There's kind of this understanding that in European Union AI technologies is regulated very strictly, but it's not, because GDPR is only for data protection, and especially United States, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
But data protection goes a long way because AI is trained by massive amounts of data,
yeah,
and if you have data protection in place, it goes a long way. And
exactly.
I would like to hear your thoughts on about the future and what are your future predictions on risk assessment in businesses and also in AI ethics. What do you think is going to happen in context
Yeah,
of everything that has happened in the last few days in the United States, as well as I think 3 weeks back with Google and Timnet Gebru. So, what
mhm.
are your thoughts on this?
So exactly the last slide I had, again, these 5 points that I had for my organization's goals, that these are kind of solutions that is most relevant in these terms in future sense. That is, I believe transparency is key. And in transparency, I don't only mean like technical transparency of the algorithm that you can explain how the decision was made by the autonomous algorithm, but I mean transparency in terms of sharing information to the public, sharing information to the user, to the government, to all the stakeholders actually who are concerned with, and even who are not concerned. It's about raising awareness. Transparency is the key in this case to actually increase trust of the company, trust in the government institutions in terms of AI regulations and ethics, and also trust of other organizations and stakeholders. So one point is transparency for me as a solution.
So, in
Another
terms,
point,
yeah, sure, go ahead, finish your point.
yeah,
Sorry.
shortly. Another point is again like to look at these in a pragmatic way, not only write down all the pieces of the frameworks, how to solve issues, but actually to go experiment. Even like we're gonna need a lot of experiments. I think we should be okay with that. And in terms of experiment, I don't mean experimenting for 10 years and waiting when there is a clash like Facebook and other many companies are doing that. In experimenting, I mean like assessing that after every year, for example, having some metrics in space, having some assessment, some measure statistics, and some organizational arrangement, the groups management who is actually taking care of the measure and who is responsible and accountable for that. So that is one of the major topics, to implement actually all the frameworks and to not be afraid to experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Another is definitely inclusivity. In inclusivity, I mean to compile in company level, compile teams from different people, different cultures, and different genders, of course. That companies are not really doing so far. It's still really highly relevant problem. Another is responsibility to be responsible for all your decisions in terms of AI ethical frameworks, whether it's regulator or the company, and accountability as well, to actually separate and put the lines between who is accountable for what, who made a decision for which kind of algorithm, for which kind of part of the system,
Mm-hmm.
and who to be addressed after, for example, there's a clash of the algorithm or there is some accident. And the last part is definitely what you already mentioned, is multidisciplinarity, to have in place psychologists, political scientists, because like myself, political scientists, psychologists, neuroscientists, I believe are really needed in every team, whoever is developing machine learning solutions. And also data scientists, because data scientists are not, do you know a lot of data scientists who are actually taking courses of philosophy, ethics, law, or any neuroscience? Or I mean, I think there is a lot of work to be done in terms of raising awareness in the people who are actually programming, are building the systems, which is gonna
Mm-hmm.
influence the whole world in the next 1 year, 10 years, or maybe 100 years. So it's very important.
Yes. So I don't know if we have time. Do Sneha, do we have
Yeah.
time for one last question?
Yeah, let's do one last question. We have already 15 minutes over, but let's do a very quick last
Yes,
question.
I would like to bring up Aishwata's question about, you know, facial recognition, or was it? Let me go back to our question. Uh, so, how different are Chinese attitudes to data privacy? Cameras with AI-powered facial recognition are everywhere, and various pilot projects use AI to give people a social credit score, punishing them for certain behavior and rewarding others for what the government considers good citizenship. So, in terms of US, it's capitalistic oriented. It's like how much money can I sell your data for, and whether I can make a profit out of it. And in Eastern philosophy, and regarding to the Chinese government's use, even though it's a collective society, and they are trying to use AI and modern technologies for social good, or what they think is social good. So how do you bridge the gap between, saying whatever you say here now, maybe you will have a governance framework you will be able to implement here in a Western nation, but in countries like India or China, it won't fly. So it's like, I'm
Yeah,
wondering, how do you do that? How do you bridge those gaps, and how do you make the companies accountable for their business decisions in countries like China and India?
actually, data protection frameworks in China is quite different from, take, United States or European Union, again, like GDPR. One of the major difference that is quite tricky for everyone actually is that while GDPR is quite specific for the context where data should not be, for example, shared or transferred or like uh, not saved. For example, the Chinese data protection frameworks regulations uh, kind of leaves the blank spaces for interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like they're more flexible. They give more flexibility and freedom to the companies. So as that's why there is more understanding that in China they have kind of more advantage in developing artificial intelligence solutions because they are more free to use the people's data.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Comparing it to United States and Europe, while they have the regulations in place, they still have it's kind of um, I mean not probably kind of um, to be it's there to be there. um, and it is not specific and gives flexibility to the companies. But to say that China is not starting caring about privacy and they're not never gonna start caring about privacy will be not very responsible to say, because I believe, and some of the people who are working in China, they believe that the time will come for China to care about the privacy of their citizens. Because right now what's happening, it's completely different from the Western society, from Western culture, of course, and you cannot change that. That's why with this approach, that's why I'm saying it's very important to invite China also and other countries in the global dialogue, because that will be Chinese technologies as well that's gonna go global and influence the Western technologies as well. Like before, in terms of human rights approaches, we've had China locked out from the context, and we kind of didn't care whether China would be compliant to human rights, United Nations human rights approaches, for example, freedom of expression or
Mm-hmm.
freedom of speech, for example. We said, okay, it's their business, it's their game. Let's leave them separate, like locked in their space. But right now, as long as these technologies are becoming global, that's why it is important to actually invite China in the dialogue with the whole world.
In terms of a company, I'm sorry if this is like taking, if I'm taking off topic, but only one last like comment. You can comment on it if you have time. In terms of, uh, when let's say there is a, I'm starting a facial recognition company here in the United States. I'm bound by the laws of the United States. But if I'm using the same technology in China, I'm going to be bound by the laws of Chinese government, and where human rights is not so rigid as it is here in the United States. How can we make a company like mine accountable across the globe? Because you can't just say, just because it's okay in China, I can do whatever I want. But as long as it's in the Europe, European Union or in United States, I'm going to abide by the laws of this. So, can we make companies globally accountable? Is that a thing that AI ethicists should be working on?
Like in this case, that comes to the organizations, the responsibility to the global organizations such as the United Nations, for example. But if we look at kind of track record on the work of United Nations in terms of human rights implementation, then we could conclude that probably they're not very effective either. So that's not a very reliable option. Another option that could be reliable is that if you make companies care a lot about their reputation and about their corporate social responsibility, if you can somehow make in these terms, you have to raise awareness in users
Mm-hmm.
so that they kind of protest as soon as the company does not meet already the privacy requirements of like general frameworks or global frameworks. So that people delete WhatsApp, like many people already did, and then download the Signal, for example. So it's again, it will be the matter of public, the reputation for the public and corporate social responsibility. Otherwise, like what we already have it doesn't work. Human rights approach is not the best case because it doesn't already work for the most of the countries. A lot of human rights are violated across the world. So that's why it's time to actually come up with totally different and new approaches, whether regulatory or ethical approach.
Anybody else has any questions before we let Anna go?
I think this was a very, very interesting session. Thank you so much, Anna. And I want to actually thank Susanna, who is an AI ethicist. She has a very extensive background in AI research and AI ethics. She's spoken with on our weekly Wednesdays in the past. And thank you so much, Susanna, to bringing in your expertise to this conversation today. And I think there are no more questions with that. And I would actually like to thank everyone for their patience with our initial issues, and staying back. And lastly, Anna, thank you so much. This was a very, very engaging conversation. Is there how, if people want to reach out to you, can they reach out to you on LinkedIn? Do you have any contact?
Exactly. I had a contact on slide. Probably I should just copy in the chat section.
Yes.
Sure, sure.
Okay, I hope I can manage that. And I definitely also want to thanks a lot for invitation and making me part of this community. I'm very happy to be here, and I hope we continue to kind of work on other topics or other projects in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. And at the last, I would actually like to thank Sudha for bringing all of us together. This is an excellent forum for learning every Wednesday. Like I say every Wednesday I learn something new. So thank you, Sudha. And with that, I think we can close the session. So thank you, everyone. You have a good day, good evening.
Thank you, Sneha, for hosting this every week and then thanking me every week for it. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Susanna, for a great interview and the questions. Thanks, Sudha, again, for organizing this.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
And you can go to Career Pivot on Driverless World School. That's where the archive of this will live. So you can go sign up, and it's just free sign up just to protect access and know who's accessing and stuff. It's not to spam you on anything else. So you can sign up on Career Pivot at Driverless World School to access the recording that should go up shortly. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Sudha, Sneha, and also Dan for all the engaging questions and discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. See you next week.
Take care.